I will never forget the sound of the impact. It was a dry, brutal thud, as if something inside me had shattered along with the silence of the house. I fell in the bathroom, my body twisted and my back pressed against the freezing tile floor. I tried to move, but the pain in my hip was so sharp it knocked the wind out of me. The towel had fallen to the side, the water was still running, and I could only stare at the ceiling, hoping time would pass quickly or that someone would hear my screams. I called my children, one by one. 5 numbers, 5 rings that sounded long, empty, indifferent. No one answered. No one, not even a text, a call back, a single word, just the echo of the phone and my breathing becoming more and more ragged. Minutes passed, then hours. The floor was so cold it felt like it was embracing me. The pain turned into fear, and the fear into a sadness unlike any other. I thought of each of them, of how I had raised them alone since I was 34, when their father died. 5 mouths to feed, 5 uniforms to wash, 5 reasons to keep breathing. And yet, here I was at 68, alone, staring at a white ceiling that offered no answer. But before I continue, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Comment down below which city you are watching from right now. Let's continue. I started talking to myself so I wouldn't lose my mind. Stay calm, Eleanor, I repeated to myself. This will pass. You're going to get out of here. But the clock in the bathroom didn't lie. 3 hours had already passed. My body was going numb, and my fingers were trembling. In the midst of my desperation, I remembered the neighbor from the apartment upstairs. Mike, a man in his 50s, quiet, kind, I barely knew him. We would cross paths in the elevator, and he would always greet me with a, "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor." I never imagined that mundane greeting would become my salvation. With great difficulty, I dragged myself to the phone that had fallen to the floor. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. With numb fingers, I dialed his number. He took a moment to answer. "Hello?" His voice sounded surprised. "Mike, it's Eleanor. From 2B, I said with a thread of a voice. "I fell. I can't get up." Silence. Then the sound of hurried footsteps. "Don't move. I'm coming right now." It took less than a minute. He pounded on the door, and when I heard his voice on the other side, I started to weep. "Stay calm, Mrs. Eleanor. I'm here." He managed to open the door with the help of the building superintendent. When he saw me on the floor, he knelt down without a second thought. "Oh my God, how long have you been like this?" 3 hours, I whispered. He covered me with a dry towel, and his hands, warm and steady, gave me a calmness my own children no longer knew how to give. "We're going to the hospital," he said decisively. "I won't leave you alone." In that moment, I understood that sometimes help doesn't come from blood, but from the soul of a stranger. He lifted me carefully, covered me with his jacket, and carried me to his car. The drive was long, but in his silence, there was more compassion than in all the empty words I had heard from my children in years. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what I feared. A hairline fracture in the hip and a bruised back. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to leave me bedridden for weeks. Mike stayed with me until they got me settled in a room. He didn't ask about my kids. He didn't demand explanations. He just sat next to the bed with that calmness of someone who understands another's pain without needing to speak. "I thank you so much," I told him. "Don't thank me," he replied. "Anyone would do the same." I looked him in the eyes and knew it wasn't true. Not just anyone would do it, not even my own children. That night, while the IV dripped and the hospital lights flickered, I closed my eyes and thought about how ironic it all was. To have given my life for 5 people who didn't even answer the phone, only to be saved by a man who barely knew my name. I didn't know it yet, but that accident wasn't a tragedy. It was a warning, a call from life to remind me that sometimes true bonds aren't inherited, they are found. The sound of the hospital monitor woke me up, a constant, monotonous beep, as if reminding me I was still alive. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The white ceiling, the smell of disinfectant, the cold light filtering through the blinds, everything felt foreign. But then I saw him, sitting next to the bed, asleep in a chair, was Mike, his head bowed, arms crossed, wearing that peaceful expression only found on people who do good without seeking anything in return. I watched him for a long time. He was a simple man, his face weathered by work, with hair starting to gray at the temples. He wore a gray jacket and worn-out jeans. He had no expensive rings or watches, nor the empty gaze of someone living in a rush. He had something more valuable: humanity. When I opened my eyes fully, he woke up with a start. "Mrs. Eleanor, how are you feeling?" he asked immediately, leaning in. "Better, thanks to you." He smiled, relieved. "The doctors said it was lucky you called in time. A little longer, and the hypothermia could have done real damage." I tried to sit up, but the pain in my hips stopped me. Mike rushed to adjust the pillow behind me. "Easy. Don't move too much. I brought you some water." He took a cup from the nightstand and offered it to me. I watched him with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "You didn't have to stay," I told him. I couldn't leave. His tone was serene but firm. "I wouldn't leave my mother alone if something happened to her." "But I am not your mother." "No," he replied, "but you could be." His words hit me harder than the fall. I felt a lump in my throat. It had been years since anyone had spoken to me with such tenderness, not even my own children. For the rest of the day, Mike stayed by my side. He kept me company while the doctors did their rounds, while the nurse changed the IV, while the clock marked the slow hours of the hospital. He told me he lived alone in the apartment upstairs and worked as a maintenance technician at a high school. "I don't have any family," he said naturally. "My parents passed away years ago, and I never married." "And no one is waiting for you at home?" "Just my dog, Buddy." He smiled with a hint of sadness. "But he understands." I understood, too. At that age, loneliness becomes a silent shadow. One learns to ignore, until one day you notice it sitting at the same table. Mike and I shared that shadow. At lunchtime, a nurse came in with a tray, chicken, rice, lukewarm soup. I wasn't hungry, but Mike insisted. "Eat a little, Mrs. Eleanor. You have to get your strength back." "Are you always this bossy?" I asked, trying to smile. "Only with the people I care about." I didn't know how to respond, so I obeyed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone actually worried about me. While I ate, my mind traveled back to the years when my children were small. I remembered running from one side to the other, cooking with one hand and fixing backpacks with the other. I remembered the sleepless nights, the exhaustion, the fear of not being able to give them enough. And now, thinking about it, it hurt to realize that all my efforts hadn't been enough to teach them the most basic thing: gratitude. "Will your children come to see you?" Mike asked cautiously. I swallowed hard. "I don't know. I called them before you arrived. None of them answered. Maybe they didn't know." "They'll find out. But they won't come out of affection, Mike." He looked at me, not knowing what to say. His silence was a gesture of respect, not discomfort. There was something in his gaze that calmed me, that silent understanding that only those who also know abandonment possess. When evening fell, the sun filtered through the hospital window, dyeing the room a melancholic gold. Mike stood up to leave. "I'm going to leave you my number in case you need anything." He took a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and left it on the table. "And don't worry, I'll stop by early tomorrow to see you." "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I want to." I was left alone, watching the door close behind him. And suddenly, I realized something that shook me. That man, practically a stranger, had done in a single day what my 5 children hadn't done in years. He listened to me, he took care of me, and he treated me with dignity. That night, when the hallway lights went out, I closed my eyes and prayed. I didn't ask for my children. I asked for Mike, for his kindness, for his tired heart, for being the hand that lifted me up when my own could no longer hold on. In the silence of the early morning, amidst the sounds of the machines, I thought that perhaps God doesn't always send angels with wings. Sometimes, He sends them with a tired voice, workers' hands, and a willing heart. And with that thought, for the first time in a long time, I was able to sleep in peace. The third day in the hospital dawned gray. The sky, covered in clouds, seemed to reflect my mood. Mike had stopped by early, just as he promised. He brought flowers from the building's garden. They weren't many, barely 3 daisies, but they seemed more beautiful to me than any store-bought bouquet. "So you don't feel alone," he told me, placing them in a plastic cup. I smiled at him, although inside I knew that as soon as he left, the loneliness would occupy its seat again. After breakfast, the phone rang. For a second, my heart raced. I thought it was one of my children, worried, regretful, with a trembling voice. I answered with hope. "Hello? Mom. I heard you fell." It was the voice of Karen, my eldest daughter. Her tone didn't sound worried, but tired, impatient. "Yes, honey. I'm in the hospital, but I'm feeling better now." "And why didn't you call me sooner?" she retorted. "I found out through the neighborhood group chat. I called you, Karen. You, and everyone." No one answered. Silence. "Oh, well, we were just busy, work, the kids, life." Her sentence was like a stab wound disguised as an excuse. I tried to change the subject. "Don't worry, it wasn't serious. A hit to the hip, but they're taking good care of me." She sighed on the other end. "Mom, while I have you, I wanted to ask you something." My chest tightened. "What is it? Do you still have those savings in the bank account, the ones Dad left when he died?" For an instant, I thought I had heard wrong. "That's what you wanted to know?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Don't get mad, Mom. It's just that if you have them, you could help Tyler with the down payment on his house." I had to close my eyes to keep from crying. The conversation wasn't about my fall. It was about money. As always. "Karen," I said slowly, "I can't talk about that right now. I'm tired." "Well, think about what I'm saying," she replied without emotion. "Call me when you get out of the hospital." And she hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. I felt the walls shrinking, the air becoming heavy. It wasn't just disappointment, it was confirmation. My children no longer saw me as a mother, only as a bank account with a name attached to it. Mid-afternoon, another call. This time it was Robert, my second son. "Mom, I heard you're admitted. What happened now?" he said with a rushed tone. "What happened now?" As if getting sick at 68 were a whim. "I fell in the bathroom, son. I've told you 1,000 times. You should sell that old house and move somewhere more comfortable." "It is my home, Robert. We built it with your father." "Yeah, but you can't live alone anymore. And if you sold, with that money you could help us all out a little." I swallowed hard. "Help you? Of course, Mom. It makes no sense for you to stay there alone, clinging to memories." That word, memories, hurt me more than any physical blow. To them, my entire life was just that, a nuisance filled with the past. I cut the call short with a broken voice. When Mike came in to see me, I tried to feign normalcy, but my eyes gave me away. "Did your children say something to you?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. They wanted to know if I still have money." He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, Mike. It's not your fault I raised them so poorly." During the afternoon, no other calls came. Just the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the murmurs of nurses, and my mind repeating a question. At what moment does a child's love go out? Because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens with everyday indifference, with the silences, with the "I'll call you later," with the distance disguised as busyness. I closed my eyes and remembered when they were children. Robert would come running home from school with torn pants, and I would scold him through laughter. Karen helped me cook, even though she made more of a mess than a meal. The twins, Stephen and Brian, slept in my arms while I sang softly, and little Emily, my light, my last daughter, the one who called me Mommy Beautiful even at 15. Where were those children now? At what moment did they stop needing me? Night fell, and with it, exhaustion. Mike returned with a cup of hot tea. "You didn't have to come again," I told him. "I couldn't sleep knowing you were here alone." He sat beside me without speaking. The silence, this time, didn't hurt. It was a shared silence of respect and company. "You know," I said after a while, "when one raises children, one believes they are sowing love, but sometimes what one sows is dependence, selfishness, or habit. Maybe they won't know what they have until they lose it. Or maybe they already lost it," I whispered. That night, while the hospital slept, I decided something I would have never dared to think before. I would not beg for affection again. I would not call anymore. I would not wait anymore. I didn't know it yet, but that thought would be the beginning of my redemption, because when love is not returned, it doesn't die, it transforms into dignity. I closed my eyes with a heart in pain, but for the first time, wide awake. 5 days passed, 5 identical sunrises with the same hospital smell, the same hallway noise, and the same hole in my heart. Mike kept coming every morning. He brought muffins, a thermos of coffee, and sometimes just his silence, that kind silence that sustained me more than any word. That morning, while I was packing my things for discharge, the nurse poked her head through the door. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, "you have visitors." For an instant, I felt a knot in my throat. Could it be them? My children? I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and replied, "Let them in, please." The door opened, and there were 5 faces that were once my life. Karen, the eldest, with her dyed blonde hair and an expensive purse hanging from her arm. Robert in a suit, phone in hand, looking rushed. The twins, Stephen and Brian, identical, serious, impatient. And Emily, the youngest, with dark sunglasses and an expression that mixed shame and pity. For a second, I wanted to cry, but I held back. I didn't want them to see me weak. They had already seen me vulnerable too many times. "Mom," Karen said with a forced tone, "you gave us such a scare." "Yeah, Mom," Robert added, putting his phone away. "You should be more careful." "It was an accident," I replied. "It can happen to anyone." "That's exactly why," Stephen interrupted. "You shouldn't be living alone." "It's dangerous," Brian added. "You have to sell that house." Emily, in silence, looked down. "Sell my house?" I asked calmly. "Of course, Mom," Karen said as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "It's big, old, and you can't maintain it anymore. Besides," Robert added, "with the money, you could help us all out a little." That phrase stuck in my chest like a thorn. Help us. Not live better. Not take care of you. Not be close to you. Help us. I looked at each of them, at those 5 adults who one day were my babies, my sleepless nights, my reason for existing, and I felt a mixture of sadness and clarity. It was as if suddenly the blindfold fell from my eyes. They didn't come for me, they came for what they believed was mine. "And what if I don't want to sell it?" I asked. Karen sighed, annoyed. "Mom, don't be stubborn. We're doing it for your own good." "For my own good," I repeated slowly. "I understand." Robert stood up, pacing the room as if it were his office. "We could invest that money, secure you a pension, a comfortable place, and you would manage everything, right?" I asked. He smiled without noticing. "Well, yes, it would be the most practical thing." I didn't answer. I just observed them. Their elegant clothes, their watches, their gestures of impatience. Not a hug, not a tear, not a flower. Just cold words, measured, calculated. Mike was in the hallway. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, watching through the partially open door. His eyes met mine, and I understood that nothing needed to be said. He knew exactly what was happening. "Mom," Karen said finally with a sweet voice, "don't get like this. We know you're tired. If you want, we'll handle everything, okay?" "No," I replied firmly. 5 pairs of eyes looked at me in surprise. "What do you mean, no?" Robert asked. "I am not going to sell my house, and I don't need anyone to handle anything." Stephen huffed, crossing his arms. "And what are you going to do, Mom? Live alone until you fall again?" "If that's the case, it will be my decision." "But you can't keep going like this," Karen shouted, losing patience. "You have no one." I smiled. "You're wrong. I do have someone." There was an uncomfortable silence. Karen frowned. "Who?" I looked toward the door. "Someone who helped me when you didn't." The silence became denser. Robert adjusted his tie. "Are you referring to that neighbor? That guy Mike? And now you trust a stranger more than your own children?" asked Emily, the only one who sounded truly hurt. "It's not that I trust more," I replied with a serene voice. "It's that he was there when I needed you." No one said anything. The twins looked at each other, uncomfortable. Karen stood up abruptly. "Mom, we don't want to argue. We are just trying to help you." "I know," I replied, watching them calmly, "and that's why I want to give you something." I slowly took my purse out of the drawer, the same purse that accompanied me all my life, with worn leather and frayed stitching. I put it on the bed. "Everything is in there," I said, looking at them one by one. "What you are looking for, so much." Karen arched an eyebrow. "In there? What do you mean?" "Open it," I replied with a slight smile. "It's yours." Robert was the first to approach. He unzipped it quickly, like someone opening a chest full of gold. The others crowded around. I saw their expectant faces, their impatient hands, and then a silence so heavy it filled the entire room. I saw them stand motionless, unable to say a word. Karen covered her mouth with her hand. Robert took a step back. Stephen lowered his head. Emily let out a trembling sigh. I said nothing. I just watched them. I knew exactly what they had found, but I wasn't going to tell them yet. Not yet, because sometimes silence can also be a lesson. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. My 5 children stared at the open bag with faces falling apart, as if they had just seen a ghost. Karen was the first to break the silence. "What is this, Mom?" she asked, her voice cracking. I didn't answer, only observed them, savoring that moment where time finally returned everything they had done to me. But before continuing, I want to make a very special invitation. Tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Hit like if you are moved by what you are hearing, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Now, let's continue. Inside the bag, there was no money, no jewelry, no keys to any property. There were only 5 sealed paper envelopes with handwritten names, one for each of my children. The shaky letters were mine. I knew it by the way the ink slid at the end of each word, as if each stroke had cost a tear. "Open them," I said softly. Karen was the first. She tore the envelope impatiently, not imagining what she was going to find. She pulled out a folded sheet and began to read aloud. Her face changed as the lines advanced. It went from indifference to astonishment, and from astonishment to weeping. "My daughter, when you were little, you told me I was your hero. I never forgot that. What you did forget was that heroes get tired too. You swore to me that when you grew up, you would take care of me. I don't expect that anymore. But I did want you to know that even with everything you did to me, I still love you, because a mother doesn't forget, but she learns to be silent." Karen folded the letter slowly and pressed it to her chest. For the first time in years, I saw her cry for real. Her tears fell on the white hospital floor, and each of them was a small piece of the girl she once was. Robert opened his clumsily. His hands were shaking. "Son, I taught you that respect isn't bought with money, but with acts, and you, without realizing it, treated me like a burden. Your silence hurt me more than any word. If one day you have children, I hope you learn to listen to them when they tell you they need you. I did it with you, and you weren't there." Robert lowered his gaze. His phone rang inside his pocket, but he didn't answer it. For the first time, he let it ring. The twins, Stephen and Brian, looked at each other before opening theirs. They were identical, but that afternoon they looked completely different. One cried in silence. The other clenched his fists in helplessness. "My sons, you always had each other, but I had no one. When your father died, I worked nights so you could study. I remember one early morning I arrived so tired I fell asleep at the table with my head on your books, and when I woke up, I realized neither of you had covered me with a blanket. That night I understood that love not taught by example is extinguished by habit." Emily, the youngest, held her envelope without daring to open it. "Do it, honey," I told her tenderly. "I wrote it for you too." Her fingers trembled as she tore the paper. "My little one, you were my hope. You hugged me even when your brothers made me cry, but you grew up and joined them. I don't blame you. Love is contagious, but so is indifference. If life makes you a mother one day, remember there is no pain greater than that of an unanswered call." When she finished reading, Emily stood up sobbing. "Mom, forgive me," she said through tears. "No," I replied, caressing her face. "I don't need forgiveness. I just needed you all to understand." For several minutes no one spoke, only the sobs and the distant sound of steps in the hallway were heard. The nurse, who had entered inadvertently, stopped at the door with moist eyes. Then Robert, still with the letter in his hand, asked, "And the money, Mom? Where is it?" I looked up. "Ah, yes, that." I reached into the bag and pulled out one last envelope, thicker than the others. It was sealed with red wax. "This is for everyone," I said. "Open it together." They did. And what they found inside wasn't money or bank documents. It was a copy of a notarized contract. Robert read it aloud, but his voice broke before reaching the end. The document declared that my house, my savings, and everything I had in my name had been transferred to another person, Mike Miller, my neighbor. Silence returned, but this time it was different. A mixture of disbelief and shame filled the room. "What did you do, Mom?" whispered Karen, pale. "What I had to do," I replied. "I left everything to the only one who was there when you weren't." "You can't do that!" shouted Robert. "That house is our inheritance." "No," I said firmly. "Inheritance is not claimed, it is earned." And with that, I lowered my gaze and closed my eyes. I didn't need to say more. They had already understood. The silence after my last sentence was so long I could hear my own heart beating. My children looked at me with a mix of astonishment, fury, and something else, fear. Fear of losing what they always believed was theirs. Robert was the first to react. He slammed the table with his closed fist. "This is insane, Mom. You can't leave everything to a stranger." "He isn't a stranger," I replied calmly. "He is the man who picked me up off the floor when you didn't answer my calls." Karen stood up abruptly from the chair. "Do you hear yourself? You are punishing us for one time we didn't answer the phone." "One time," I repeated with a sad smile. "Just one time, Karen?" I looked her in the eyes. "Do you know how many times I waited for your calls on Sundays? How many times I cooked your favorite dish thinking you would come?" She lowered her head. Stephen tried to intervene. "Mom, we understand you're hurt, but you can't make decisions like this." "I already made them," I said. Emily, the youngest, was crying silently. "You didn't do this for revenge, did you?" she asked with a trembling voice. "No, daughter. I did it for justice." No one spoke for a long while. Robert paced from one side to the other like a caged lion. "I'm going to talk to a lawyer," he said, beside himself. "This can't be legal." "It is totally legal," I replied. "I already verified it. And it is signed, sealed, and recorded." "Mom!" shouted Karen. "You're leaving us with nothing." "I leave you everything you left me. Silence and distance." Karen pressed her lips together, holding back tears. Stephen and Brian looked at each other, not knowing whose side to take, and Emily, the smallest, slowly approached my bed. "Mom," she whispered, "are you really going to do it?" I took her hand. "I already did it, honey." At that moment, the door opened softly. It was Mike. He held a bag of fruit and a bouquet of small flowers in his hands. Upon seeing the scene, he stopped, uncomfortable. "Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt." "It's okay, Mike," I said with a serenity that contrasted with the tension in the air. "We were just talking about you." My children's faces turned toward him with a mix of contempt and bewilderment. Robert looked him up and down. "So you're the famous Mike?" "Yes, sir," he replied humbly, "and I'm not famous, just a neighbor." "A neighbor who took advantage of my mother," Robert replied with a venomous tone. Mike took a step back, visibly uncomfortable, but I spoke before he could defend himself. "Enough. No one took advantage of me." My voice rumbled in the room with a force that surprised everyone, even me. "Mike didn't ask for anything. Not a dime, not a promise. He was just there. He did what you didn't do. He treated me like a person, not a burden." Karen frowned. "And that gives you the right to leave him everything?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "Because love is not measured in blood, but in acts. Because he who lifts you from the ground deserves more than he who watches you fall." Robert huffed helplessly. "Do you know what people will say, Mom?" "I don't care," I replied. "People didn't call me when I was lying on the bathroom floor." Stephen ran his hands over his face. "This is craziness," he repeated. "No, son," I said softly. What was craziness was expecting love from those who only saw a burden in me. Another silence fell. The kind of silence that cuts the air, that forces you to look inward. Emily broke down crying and hugged my arm. "Forgive me, Mom." "You are forgiven, daughter." "And him?" she said, pointing to Mike. "What is he going to do with all that?" Mike stepped forward nervously. "I don't want anything, Mrs. Eleanor. I only wanted to help you." "I know," I replied, "but I want you to accept it because you earned it. Not with favors, but with humanity." My children kept silent. They didn't know whether to scream or stay quiet. Pride kept them standing, but their looks said what their mouths could not. Guilt. I settled into the bed and sighed. "I don't hate you," I said slowly, "but I don't need you either." "And what are we supposed to do now?" asked Robert, exhausted. "Learn," I replied. "Learn to love without expecting inheritances, to care without conditions, to be there without asking for a reward." "And you?" asked Karen. "What will you do with your life now?" "Live it," I said with a calm smile. "Perhaps for the first time, live it for real." Mike lowered his gaze, moved. "I don't know what to say, Mrs. Eleanor." "Don't say anything," I answered him. "Just stay by my side for a while." My children gathered their things without looking at me. One by one, they left the room. Only Emily, the youngest, stopped at the door. "Mom," she said through tears, "can we start over someday?" "Someday, maybe," I replied. "But not today." When the door closed, silence returned, but it didn't hurt anymore. Mike sat next to me and took my hand. "Are you sure about what you did?" he asked. "More than ever." "They won't understand it." "They don't have to understand me," I replied. "They only have to remember me." That night, while the hospital lay in shadows, I knew I hadn't just signed a will. I had signed my freedom. Because true legacy isn't in the assets you leave, but in the lessons you teach before you go. And I had finally taught the most important one, that love without gratitude is a broken contract, and that blood without respect is worth nothing. Returning home after the hospital was like returning to an old body that no longer belonged to me. The ambulance stopped in front of the green front door, the one my husband painted with me one summer afternoon while the kids played on the sidewalk. The sun was going down, and the facade of the house seemed smaller, quieter, as if it had also aged in my absence. The EMT helped me down slowly. The air smelled of humidity and dry lavender. When I crossed the threshold, the silence was so deep I seemed to hear my own thoughts. The grandfather clock in the hallway kept marking the same hours as always, but now every tick-tock sounded like a question without an answer. Is it worth it to keep living when no one waits for you? "Shall I help you with the bags?" Mike asked with that voice of his that he never raised, as if he feared breaking something inside me. "Sure, son." "Put them in the dining room." I watched him as he entered. His steps were careful, almost reverent. He looked at the portraits on the walls like someone touring an ancient museum. There were Karen with her braids at school, Robert in his football uniform, the twins holding a birthday cake, and Emily hugging her father on her first day of school. 5 lives hanging on the wall, but none in my present. Mike left the bags on the table and turned toward me. "It must be hard coming back here alone." "It was at the beginning," I answered him, "but not so much today." He nodded without saying more. We spent a good part of the day cleaning, dusting off memories. I indicated where I kept the cups, the tablecloths, the porcelain plates that were only used at Christmas. Every object had a story, and while I spoke, I realized that I hadn't shared my voice with someone for so long. Mike listened with attention, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking at me with a compassion so clean it hurt. When the clock struck 6, he made coffee. The aroma filled the house, mixing with the smell of old wood and stirred dust. We sat face to face, at the same table where I used to have dinner with my children. Now there were only 2 cups, 2 silences, 2 broken lives trying to fit together. "Thank you for staying," I told him, watching the steam from the coffee. "Thank you for letting me in," he replied. "Not everyone would do it. Not everyone deserves it," I added with a calm that pierced me. That phrase stuck with me. Not everyone deserves it. Because for many years I had believed that love was an obligation, that affection should be given without measure, even if it hurt. Mike was teaching me the opposite. That kindness must also be protected, that the soul cannot keep giving without receiving. That night, late, we went out to the porch. The fresh air smelled of wet earth. The garden was neglected, but some blue hydrangeas were still blooming. My husband used to say that hydrangeas are grateful flowers because they give beauty even to those who forget them. I looked at them with tenderness. "My husband planted them over 20 years ago," I told him. "He said they were the heart of the house." Mike crouched down and touched one of them carefully. "Then your house still beats." We stayed in silence. Fireflies lit up among the bushes, and in some distant corner, a dog barked. The silence, which before weighed on me like a stone, now felt like a warm coat. During the following days, Mike began to spend more time there. He came early to bring bread from the market, helped me water the plants, and fixed the dining room lamp that had been flickering for years. The house started to change not in appearance, but in soul. The air no longer smelled of abandonment, but of freshly baked bread and hope. I, in turn, felt alive again. I cooked again, listened to music, combed my hair with care. One afternoon, I even put on the blue dress I had kept since my 40th anniversary with my husband. Mike looked at me surprised. "You look lovely, Mrs. Eleanor." "Thank you," I replied, laughing. It was time to dust off the woman who lived inside here. He offered me his arm in a gesture that reminded me of the old times. We walked through the garden like two ghosts who had decided to come back to life. But peace never arrives without a test. One morning, the phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Mom, can we talk?" I closed my eyes, and for an instant, the past returned with force. The girl who hugged me on rainy nights. The teenager who told me, "Don't cry, Mommy. Everything will be okay." I swallowed hard. "Of course, honey. You can always talk to me." "I want to see you," she said. "I want to ask for your forgiveness." I hung up the phone and stayed in silence. Mike, who was sweeping the porch, looked at me from the door. "Everything okay?" "My daughter," I said with a thread of a voice. "She wants to come see me." He smiled, and his eyes filled with a sweetness that did me good. "Then it's time to open the windows, Mrs. Eleanor. Let the light in." That afternoon, I prepared the house as if it were Christmas. I took out the old tablecloths, lit a candle in the dining room. I baked the apple pie that Emily loved as a child. My hands shook, not from age, but from the mixture of fear and hope. When I heard the doorbell, I felt my heart stop. I opened the door slowly. There was my daughter Thinner, eyes swollen from crying. She looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything, and then threw herself into my arms. "Mom, forgive me, please." I hugged her as tight as my bones allowed. "You are already forgiven, honey." I caressed her hair. "You don't know how long I waited for this moment." We sat at the table, and for a long time we didn't talk about anything. We just ate, cried, and smiled from time to time. Sometimes love doesn't need words, only presence. When we finished, she sighed. "The others are furious with you," she said timidly. "Robert wants to sue you." I smiled with serenity. "I know. But I'm not on his side, Mom. I got tired of living with resentment." I took her hand. "You did well. Resentment is a poison that is drunk in slow sips." Before leaving, Emily looked around. "This house feels different. Because now it has life, honey," I told her. "There are no more screams or reproaches, only silence." She smiled. "A nice silence." "Exactly. A silence that doesn't hurt." Mike entered just at that moment, with his hands stained with garden soil. Emily looked at him with curiosity. "You're Mike, right?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied nervously. "Thank you for taking care of my mom." He lowered his gaze. "I didn't take care of her. I just returned to her what the world took away. Attention." Emily remained quiet for a few seconds and then, with a shy smile, thanked him again before leaving. After closing the door, Mike sat across from me. "She was brave, you know," he said. "Opening your heart after so much damage isn't easy." "I'm not brave," I replied. "I just understood that life becomes short when one holds grudges." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake listening to the murmur of the wind against the windows, thinking about my children, about Mike, about everything lived, and I understood something I had never understood before. Love doesn't disappear, it transforms. Some move away, others arrive, but the heart always finds a way to keep beating. The following days were calm. Mike started fixing the garden fence, and I began writing again in my old notebook with the brown cover. There, between crooked sentences and ink stains, I left small fragments of what I had learned. One morning I wrote, "Silence is not loneliness. It is the voice of the soul when finally no one interrupts it." Sometimes I sat in front of the window to watch the leaves fall and felt gratitude for everything, even for the pain, because without it I wouldn't have reached that moment. One afternoon, Mike brought me an envelope. "It arrived in the mailbox," he said. "It's from Robert." Inside there was only one sheet. "Mom, I can't understand you, but I can't hate you either. I suppose that's a start. Robert." I smiled. It was little, but enough. That night, while Mike prepared tea, I opened a new page in my notebook and wrote slowly, with firm handwriting, "The house of silences is no longer alone. Now peace dwells here, And where there is peace, there is love. I closed the notebook and kept it next to my husband's photo. Then I looked at Mike, who was smiling without realizing it, and I thought that maybe life hadn't robbed me of anything. It had only made me wait a little longer to return to me what I deserved, a quiet love. Winters have always seemed to me a perfect metaphor for the soul. Everything seems asleep, but beneath the cold, life keeps beating. That winter was like that. Silent, gray, but full of new heartbeats. Some months have passed since I returned from the hospital. Mike is still here. He comes every morning with a smile and hot bread, and although he never says it, I know he does it to ensure I am still breathing. I make him coffee. He tells me stories from his youth, and sometimes, without realizing it, we laugh like two old friends, sharing the secret of staying alive. The house has changed. Laughter is heard again, flowers open again, and the air doesn't weigh so much. Even the portraits of my children seem less sad, as if they too were trying to forgive themselves from those walls. But I know, even if no one says it, that my body is tired. There are nights when the pain in my bones wakes me up, and memories come with such clarity that I struggle to distinguish between the lived and the dreamed. It doesn't scare me. I have made peace with the idea of the end, not as a defeat, but as a kind farewell. One rainy afternoon, while Mike slept in the armchair, I opened my old notebook. I decided to write a letter. Not for my children, nor for the lawyer, nor even for Mike. I wrote it for me, for the woman I was, the one who endured, the one who fell, the one who bent without breaking, that woman who many times wished to disappear, but who always, for some reason, kept breathing. Dear Eleanor, you made it. Not because you defeated anyone, but because you didn't let the pain turn you cruel. You were wounded, forgotten, and humiliated, but you kept loving. And although your own turned their backs on you, you found family in a stranger's heart. That is your victory. Not that of the one who accumulates inheritances, but that of the one who learns to live without them. I folded the letter and put it in the notebook. I didn't plan to show it to anyone. It was my way of closing the circle. The days followed their course. Mike insisted on accompanying me to the doctor, on cooking, on cleaning. I pretended to be stronger than I was. I didn't want to worry him. I had learned to hide pain for many years. Doing it one more time cost me nothing. One morning, while the sun barely sneaked through the curtains, I felt something different. It wasn't pain. It was a deep exhaustion, as if my body was asking me for rest. I didn't want to alarm Mike, so I told him I would go rest in the bedroom. He nodded. Rest, Mrs. Eleanor. I'll make you tea when you wake up. I smiled. Thank you, son. I closed the bedroom door. The air smelled of jasmine, the same perfume I used when I was young. I sat in front of the mirror and observed my reflection, the face full of wrinkles, the eyes still alive. For the first time in a long time, I found myself beautiful not for what I saw, but for what I had endured. I took a small wooden box out of the drawer. Inside, I kept a few things. A photo of my husband smiling. A lock of Emily's hair from when she was a child, a ring without a stone, and a small key. That key opened the desk drawer where I had left envelopes for everyone. 5 letters, 1 for each child, and 1 more for Mike. I took a breath. Writing them had been harder than leaving them the inheritance. Every word had bled. The letter to my children. My children, if you are reading this, I am no longer here. I don't want tears or reproaches. I want you to listen to me with your heart, not with guilt. I didn't leave you the house because I wanted to punish you. I did it because I needed to teach you something life never showed you, that love isn't measured by what is received, but by what is given. I already gave you everything. Now it is your turn to learn to give without expecting. I didn't hate you for a single day. I just waited too long for you to return. If you ever feel the world forgets you, think of me. And remember that a mother always waits, even when she no longer has a body to do so. I cried, rereading it. The tears stained the ink, but it didn't matter. The message was there. Love doesn't need to be intact to be eternal. The letter for Mike. Mike, I don't know if I'll be able to thank you in person, so I'm doing it in writing. Thank you for arriving when no one else did. Thank you for treating me with respect when I already felt invisible. You didn't inherit a house. You inherited a story. Take care of it, not like a place, but like a heart that still beats within these walls. If you ever doubt what you did for me, look at the garden. The hydrangeas bloom for you. I folded the letter with trembling hands, put it in the envelope, and sealed it with red wax. Afterwards, I lay down. My body felt heavy, but my mind was at peace. I felt the evening air enter through the window, soft, warm, like a caress. I closed my eyes, and for the first time I didn't think about my children, nor the pain, nor the lost time. I thought of Mike's voice telling me, "Good morning," and the smell of hot bread in the mornings. And so, without fear, I let myself go. The next morning, Mike found me asleep with a smile. The cup of tea was still steaming on the nightstand, untouched. He touched my hand, but it was already cold. He sat next to me, and for hours he didn't cry. He just held my hand as if he could still transmit a little of his warmth to me. When the children arrived, everything was arranged. The notary awaited them with the documents, and Mike with the envelopes. The news spread fast, like everything involving money and inheritance. Robert was the first to arrive with a tense face. "Where is she?" he asked. "In her room," Mike replied with a firm voice. "Don't disturb her now." "She is my mother," shouted Robert. "Yes," replied Mike, "but I was the one who accompanied her when you didn't." Karen arrived shortly after with dark glasses. Emily brought eyes swollen from crying. Stephen and Brian in silence. When they saw their mother's body, their pride broke in a single instant. The notary, fulfilling the last will, handed them the envelopes. Mike retired to the garden. He didn't want to witness the reading. He just stayed next to the hydrangeas, watching the gray sky starting to clear. Inside each envelope, the letters Eleanor had written spoke for themselves. Karen fell to her knees upon reading hers. Robert broke down crying without being able to contain himself. Stephen and Brian hugged for the first time in years, and Emily, with trembling hands, found an additional note inside her letter. "My girl, when you hug me in your memories, don't think about what you didn't do. Think about what you can still do. Take care of your brothers. Don't allow money to divide you anymore. And if you ever visit my grave, bring flowers, but also laughter. I don't want crying. I want life." Mike entered the house at sunset. Everything was in silence. On the dining room table, an envelope with his name awaited him. He opened it slowly. Inside, besides the letter, was a small key. It was the one for the desk. He opened the drawer and found something else. A property deed with his name and a note at the bottom. "This house is no longer mine, Mike. Now it is yours, not for you to live in it, but for you to continue caring for its soul. Here I left my story, but also yours. Promise me you will keep planting hydrangeas every spring." Mike wept for the first time in many years. He sat in front of the window and looked at the garden. The flowers seemed bluer than ever, as if the sky had come down to rest among the petals. The funeral was simple, as she wanted. Without speeches, without expensive wreaths, just a white casket and a bouquet of hydrangeas on the lid. The children arrived together in silence. Mike remained in the back with his head bowed. When the priest finished speaking, Karen approached. "May I?" she said to Mike. He nodded. She was her mother. Karen placed her hand on the casket and between sobs said, "Forgive us, Mom. We arrived late, but we arrived," Robert added in a low voice, "and thank you for not leaving us with the lie that we were enough." Mike waited for everyone to leave. Only then did he take a final envelope from his pocket. It was the one Eleanor had left for that moment. He opened it and read aloud, facing the wind, facing the freshly covered grave. "If you are reading this, Mike, I want to ask you a favor. Don't let this house become a museum of pain. Fill it with laughter, with flowers, with good people. And when spring comes, open the windows and let the air in. That will be my way of coming back." Mike folded the letter and kept it next to his heart. He stayed there, watching the sun fall behind the cemetery. The wind moved the leaves, and for an instant, he swore he heard a voice whisper his name. "Thank you." A year later, Eleanor's house bloomed again. Mike kept his promise. The hydrangeas grew stronger. Neighbors came to visit him, and sometimes Eleanor's children, too. Emily helped him paint the walls. Robert brought him bread, and Karen, with time, stayed some days to read to her grandchildren in the garden. They didn't talk about the past. It wasn't necessary. The silence, which once was painful, was now peace. One afternoon, while Mike watered the plants, a white butterfly landed on one of the hydrangeas. He smiled, looked at the sky, and said in a low voice, "I know you're here, Mrs. Eleanor." and the wind blew softly like an answer. Sometimes life isn't about how much we receive, but about how much we are capable of continuing to give even when no one is watching us. Eleanor left in peace, not with the bitterness of one who was forgotten, but with the serenity of one who understood that love is not measured by blood, but by gestures. Her children learned late that affection isn't bought with gifts nor inherited with assets. They learned that a mother's true legacy isn't kept in a will, but in the imprint her kindness leaves on the hearts she touched. And Mike, he is still there tending the garden, opening the windows, speaking to the air as if she could still hear him. Every spring, the hydrangeas bloom again, and the perfume that escapes through the cracks seems to say, I am still here, not with my body, but with everything I was. Time cured what words could not. The House of Silences became a refuge of peace, and everyone who enters it says they feel something special, as if Eleanor's soul kept walking barefoot through the hallways. Because in the end, that is what we are, stories sown in others, flowers that bloom when the soul learns to forgive. Tell me in the comments which part of this story touched your heart the most. Hit like if you felt Eleanor left you a life lesson, and subscribe to the channel because here we remember again and again that true love doesn't die. It simply learns to bloom in silence. Yeah,